Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is October 15th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to keep this podcast a little shorter here just to follow up on a couple of things that we were discussing on Sunday evening for the week ahead segment, some things that took place yesterday, and then obviously some of the news that broke today. The main focus is going to be on the markets, a brief discussion on the NBA scandal, if you will, surrounding Hong Kong and China and how that is dripping into U.S.-China trade negotiations or lack thereof, or the greatest deal ever as far as phase one is concerned. Whatever this means, I have no idea. And we're going to discuss the debates that took place earlier this evening between the 12 Democratic contenders for the presidency. But first to the markets. Let's just get some of this news out of the way. The S&P gained 29.5 points, an increase of 1%. The Dow was up 237 points, an increase of 0.9%. The Nasdaq gained 100 points, an increase of 1.25 percentage points for the day. And the Russell 2000, the small cap index, gained 18 points, an increase of 1.2%. The Dow Jones Transports gained 1.25%. The New York Stock Exchange was also up 0.9%. So a big up day, a big rally. Again, kudos to our volatility model. Again, it can be to the upside, it can be to the downside. I'm going to have to work to better figure out which way it is likely to move on a day-to-day basis. If I can do that, we can all become very wealthy very quickly, but that's what makes it so difficult. That's why it covers both sides of the spectrum. But what it does do is it does tell us that volatility is here to stay for the remainder of this year, to say the least. And so far, it continues to hold a lot of water. So we'll continue updating that model, continuing to inform this audience as to how volatile it's going to be, and we'll continue to monitor it to see how valid this model is. But so far, so good. Anticipate for the rest of the week that we are likely going to continue to see these types of volatile movements, especially in the S&P 500 and especially in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. We have oil trading at $52.90. That's WTI. And then Brent, the international metric, is at $58.80. How does that relate? That's pretty much unchanged from yesterday's podcast. We have gold trading at $1,481 an ounce. Silver, $17.44 an ounce. You know, with this whole, now, I don't know what this is. If this is a risk-on event, meaning that people are here to buy stocks, they want to get involved with the riskier assets. Maybe they're going to start getting away from the treasury market, from the bond market. Maybe they're going to get away from the precious metals space, particularly with gold and silver. Hey, you know what that is? That's called opportunity. That's called opportunity, because I still believe that the precious metals are in a bull market, that this experiment that has proven to be a failure by central banks the world over, which is evident. It is evident, ladies and gentlemen. This is non-negotiable. There is nothing to argue here anymore. It's done. They failed. How do we know? Because now they're coming back and trying to they are putting the pedal to the metal once again. And I'm telling you, even though they do have the pedal to the metal once again, it's not hard enough. It's just not enough for them to get the same type of juice that they were able to squeeze out of these lemons years ago. Diminishing marginal returns. It's real. It's economics 101. This is what they teach freshmen. This is what you might even learn this in high school if you have an economics course. Diminishing marginal returns. That's how basic and fundamental this is. Okay? We did the presentation on this. Are central bankers trapped? Check that out on the Capital News or our YouTube channel, the Capital News. Are central bankers trapped? Okay? Because they are. Because they're not going to come out and to admit the truth that their monetary experiment for this past decade, since the financial crisis of 08-09, that they have been engaged with is an abysmal failure. They were able to get their reflation trade on. They were able to cause their inflation with asset prices, which is exactly what they were attempting to do. That is market manipulation by definition. These people should be strung up. But this is what they're doing. They get away with it because they're the Federal Reserve. They're the ECB. They're the Bank of Japan. They're the Bank of England. They're the Reserve Bank of Australia. They're economists. They're PhD economists. They're brilliant. You can't challenge them. You can't question them. This is a crime. This is a fraud. They have failed. They are throwing everything and the kitchen sink at these markets. They are trying to, again, reflate and inflate. At a time, at least here in the United States, we have a president who is claiming that this is the greatest economy in the history of the United States. And we have members of the Federal Reserve, particularly the chairman, Jerome Powell, coming out and saying, well, hey, this is fine. The U.S. economy is in a good spot. Well, then why are you engaged in emergency monetary policy? Why are you cutting interest rates? Why are you printing $60 billion per month to buy short-duration U.S. Treasury bills? Why are you doing it, Jay? If everything's so good, if this is the greatest economy ever in the history of the United States, why are you engaged in emergency monetary policy? Why are you engaged in the overnight repo market to the tune of some $60, $70 billion per night? Not per month, not per quarter, per night. They cannot answer these questions, and they're not going to, because last month in September they said this was a one-off. Now they're doing it in perpetuity. There is no end in sight to this. This market is, and global markets as well, are attempting to correct to fair value. The President of the United States, other politicians around the world, central banks around the world do not want it to happen. They just don't want it to happen. Free market capitalism has not been shot in the foot. It's been shot in the face. And it is a huge disgrace, at least here in the United States, which pretends to be a free market capitalistic society. We couldn't be anything further from it. This is not free market capitalism. Free market capitalism allows markets to correct. Corrections are good things. They are healthy things for the market. They allow people who have been doing the prudent thing, saving their money, to wait for prices to fall, to go in and make investments, whether it's to buy a car, whether it's to start an education, whether it's to buy a home, whether it's to start a business, whether it's simply to buy more product, or to go in and make more investments with assets that have just depreciated in value. That's how this is supposed to work. The call for negative interest rates, the call for lower interest rates, the call for monetary easing, for quantitative easing, is a fraud. And when it comes out of the mouth of the President of the United States, it's a disgrace. When it actually is implemented by central bankers, it's a crime. But nobody questions it. You have this debate tonight between the Democrats, and again, they're talking about income inequality, which they should, which this entire nation should be talking about. Not because we want to demonize wealth or the success of individuals. We don't want to do that here. We want to applaud wealth. We want to applaud success. But when it's acquired fraudulently, when it's acquired because you're buddy-buddy with somebody who has access to the printing press, who creates money out of thin air, and you get that cash first, that's not innovation. That's not out-competing the market. That's having an inside track. And that ain't right. That's un-American. You know, you wouldn't be surprised if they do this in China, if they do this in some third world country, which they do. But for it to be done here in the United States, it's a disgrace. But this is what has been done in this country, ladies and gentlemen, for a very long time. This has not just started under Donald Trump and Jay Powell at the Federal Reserve. This has been going on for generations. Generations. And there is no end in sight. In fact, they're getting desperate because I think they understand that the sand in the hourglass is starting to run out. That's why they're desperate. I mean, you have stock markets right now the world over. Even the French stock market right now is at a 12-year high. You heard me correctly, is at a 12-year high. That was right before the financial crisis. What business does the French stock market have doing at a 12-year high at this point? when for all intents and purposes, the continent of Europe is in a recession, or it's headed into a recession, yet you have the French stock exchange at a 12-year high. Well, go back 12 years, folks. What was that? That was the beginning of the Great Recession. You have the Japanese markets up at, I think, like a 10-month high right now. I mean, are we in a melt-up phase? We've been talking about this as a possibility. I've always said it's, in my opinion, that this better not happen. Because if it does, it's complete manipulation, it's complete corruption, it's a complete farce, it's a complete fraud. And so I didn't want to assign a probability to it, but I said, well, you know what, it's possible. And if you look at the volatility model, typically when you see higher volatility, it's tilted to the downside. That's just historic. So that's just going back and looking at the data. We have 20 years of data that we go through. And of course, we could go back further. But most of the time when you have these increases in volatility, it's to the downside. So we said, well, yeah, a melt-up is always possible. But there'd have to be a lot of things in movement that really get that thing to jive, to go up that way. Chances are, probability speaking, it's more likely to come down incorrect. Well, you know, they're throwing everything and the kitchen sink at these markets to keep them going. So if the idiots on Wall Street get their fix of this monetary methadone, of this heroin, of this crack cocaine that they are so desperately addicted to, well, then it's anybody's guess, folks. It really is. It really is. But these markets are not correcting to fair value. They're just not. They're just not. And it's a true shame, because there are people out there who are attempting to do the right thing. There are people out there who are trying to save and trying to invest, and maybe they want to go out and they want to buy a vehicle, or they want to start a family and buy a house, but the asset prices are too high and they just can't do it. When the Federal Reserve intervenes and continues to inflate these assets, it just makes it more expensive, and which makes it harder and harder for these people to buy homes. It's a shame. It's a true crime. And you have the debates. They're talking about income inequality, like I said, as they should. Who brings up the Federal Reserve? Who brings up low interest rates? Who brings up quantitative easing? Who brings up negative interest rates? Who brings up the repo market? Nobody. Nobody. And it's because they're either in on it, or they're too stupid to understand it, or they don't have the balls to say it. All three are unacceptable if you want to be the commander-in-chief of this country, who want to restore this country like they all claim that they want to. Whether that's on the Democratic side or whether that's the Republican and Donald Trump right now. Makes no difference. Because old Donnie Boy's getting his wish. He wanted lower interest rates. Not when he was candidate Trump. When he was candidate Trump, he hit it right on the head. This is a bubble. This is causing distortions. This is all fake. But now he's president. Now I want that easy money. Obama got it. Now I want it. We have a 70-year-old baby in the Oval Office, and it's a disgrace. It's not helping you. Your costs are going to continue to go up. There's no end in sight. There's no truth-telling. You can't even find it. Doesn't matter what station you're listening to, MSNBC, CNN, Fox, everybody's got their spin. You can't find it. You can't tell heads from tails. You just don't know. And on top of this, the markets rallied because of it was earnings season kickoff, like we were saying yesterday. Be on the lookout for primarily the banks. And lo and behold, they all did just fine. Now, they didn't do great. Goldman Sachs didn't do great. But J.P. Morgan they were just fine. Making most of their money on fixed income and currency and commodity trading. That's where they made most of their money. Not on loans, not on actually doing what banks are supposed to do. Not on loan volume and great performance in that book. No. And then, of course, again, like we said, when you lower the expectations going into earnings season, if you got a lower hurdle to jump over, it's easier to make it. It's easier to beat. Because when you say things aren't going to be so great, analysts come out and lower their projections. I mean, what are these analysts doing? Aren't they supposed to know that these banks are going to come out, or any corporation for that matter is going to lower it? This is a whole joke. It's a whole joke. Because you see it on both sides. Sometimes they beat and the stock goes down. Sometimes they lose less than what was anticipated and the stock takes off. It takes off. That's why you can't get bogged down into day-to-day movements. That's why you got to have a plan. That's why you have to stay diversified, and you just have to stick with it. And sometimes that is very difficult. So that's where we are with that. We have the U.S. 10-year Treasury at 1.77%, and the VIX, the volatility index, gave back another 7 percentage points for the day and is at $13.54. In my estimation, that is much too low, but we'll see what happens. Is because if this is a melt-up, then it's going to continue going lower. So the Dems debate, there's really not much to say, folks. There really isn't. There wasn't a lot of fireworks. I watched the vast majority of the debate. It's just they're obviously trying to whittle it down. There was all 12 of them up there on the stage. I anticipate probably over the next couple months, by year end, I guess, it's probably going to be whittled down probably to about half of that. At least probably a few, 3 of them will probably at least drop off. And then as we make our way through 2020, of course, they will start to drop off because they'll run out of money. It's go time. Somebody's got to make a move, this, that, and the other. So that's just the natural progression of things. They were, discussing the same topics that they're always going to discuss. Nothing changes there, and that's fine. Their ideas are not what's right for this country as far as I'm concerned. However, despite the fact that there are a lot of shortcomings with Donald Trump at this juncture, I think if Donald Trump can skirt this impeachment, he's likely going to win again. And I take no pleasure in saying that. I really don't, because I don't think this country can take another 4 years of this divisiveness and this finger pointing and a continuation of lower interest rates and all of this monetary experiment that goes unchecked. I just don't think it can take another 4 years. I really don't. But, the Democrats aren't offering much of anything else. Again, it's who can offer more free stuff at the expense of course, the American taxpayer, because it's not free. So it's just one-upping each other, and then it's just simply going to be that electorate on the Democratic side who goes into those caucuses and primaries and pulls the lever for their favored candidate. And whoever they think makes the most sense, whoever's giving away the most free stuff that seems reasonable, that's who's going to get it. And, we hope that doesn't happen, but those are the candidates right now. Now, there is some speculation that the former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, the multi-billionaire, is starting to once again contemplating entering the market or the debates to be the president here. So we're going to have to see if Michael Bloomberg does enter the campaign for 2020. That'll throw a big wrench in everything, because clearly he has the money to self-fund himself if he wants to go. He has name recognition. He's from New York City. He's one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. Kudos to him. So we'll have to see what Michael Bloomberg does, but I think there is an opportunity for him to get into this race yet if he so chooses. I think he'd probably be in the upper echelons, probably within the top 4 candidates pretty quickly, just on name recognition alone. And the money that he has and the business acumen that he has, it would make him probably a decent candidate and somebody to contend with, because he's not somebody who's going to be out there advocating, at least I wouldn't think, for a whole bunch of free stuff and attempting to outdo each other on that note. Because I do believe, if memory serves me correctly, he decided to not get into the race if Joe Biden entered the race. Well, now, crazy Joe Biden is involved with this Ukrainian scandal, and if Michael Bloomberg thinks that the calculus is such that this is going to perhaps knock Joe Biden out of the race at some point or really weaken his chances, then he might step up to the plate and get involved with this campaign. So we'll have to see. Time will tell. We'll continue monitoring these debates. We'll continue watching them for any type of big fireworks, if anybody really goes at anybody. There weren't really big fireworks, although the candidates were finally starting to attack Elizabeth Warren. I do not think they quote-unquote dethroned her this evening. I think she still has legs. I think she will still continue to be in that upper echelon with Bernie, with Joe Biden, at least for right now. But anything can change very quickly. Now on to our discussion here between the NBA and this whole China-Hong Kong U.S. trade dynamic that we're seeing here. One of the things that I wanted to bring up on Sunday, but I just didn't have the time. We were talking about so many other things. I was going to actually use LeBron James as an example. I'm not a basketball fan. I don't really follow it, but if anybody, I'm sure everybody out there has at least heard of LeBron James. So I was going to use LeBron James as a potential example here, because I think the whole scandal, the whole story is quite shameful for the NBA. Because what we had here was a manager or a general manager from the Houston Rockets basketball team sending out a message via Twitter, basically in support of the Hong Kong protests, which he's basically being an advocate for free speech and the right to protest against the Chinese Communist Party, which is really not for free speech and for the right to protest. But they are, the Chinese Communist Party has to walk this tightrope here because the world is watching. The world is watching, and they cannot come down and have another Tiananmen Square event, although who knows, that is still something that is possible, especially if these Hong Kong protests become more violent or they continue where the Chinese are just saying enough's enough and they come down with the hammer. That's speculation. We'll have to wait and see, but everybody is watching this, okay? Well, the NBA didn't like it because the NBA has been working very hard to get involved with the Chinese market, and they have about 500 million Chinese, yes, 500 million Chinese who watch basketball, okay? That's more than the entire population of the United States of America, and I don't know how many Americans watch basketball, but it ain't all of us, and it's not, religiously. You got 500 million Chinese watching basketball games. Okay, so you virtually just, even if you assume that every American watches basketball religiously, you've just doubled your market. You've just doubled your market, like in the blink of an eye. Okay, so I understand the want and the desire for the NBA to say, "Whoa, manager down there, you have to delete that tweet stat, and you have to issue an apology to the people of China, to the government of China, the Chinese Communist Party," which is shameful. In the example I was going to use in the defense of American values, well, I say, you know what should happen? Somebody like LeBron James should come out and say, you know what, NBA? We're Americans first. Yeah, we make a lot of money. We play a sport. We play a game that we love. But we're Americans first. And we put American values and principles ahead of the almighty dollar. And if you're going to make this man delete his tweet and issue an apology to the Chinese Communist Party and basically put the Chinese Communist Party and the almighty dollar ahead of American values, well then, LeBron James isn't going to be playing basketball anymore. That's what they should have said. But they didn't. The idiot comes out, LeBron James, and says, well, you know what? This was the general manager's mistake because he was ill-informed about what was actually going on in Hong Kong. Sit down and shut up, LeBron James. You should be ashamed of yourself. All these athletes, they want to kneel or sit down or turn their back on the American flag, during the national anthem. They can't stand up for this. They can't believe in these American values, in the system that allows these people that have not much of any intellect, but they have some God-given skill and talent to play a sport that's basically throwing a ball around, which is absolutely nothing, virtually mindless, but it's entertaining to people for whatever reason, and they're multi-millionaires. And that's all they're after. There is no country, folks. Corporations, there's no country. There's no values here. There's no putting America first. There's no free speech. There's no right to protest. There's no, freedom to peaceful assemble. There's no right and freedom of religion. There's nothing. There's only profits. That's it. That's what everybody is being boiled down to. Again, it's human resources. You're not a human being. You're a human resource. And when you are expended, when you are no longer needed, when margins get squeezed, you are gone. You are not seen as a father or a mother or a husband or a wife, a caregiver. You're just a resource. You're just a commodity. Sign up, see you later. There's no country. This is a disgrace. And it's not getting any better. The swamp is not being drained. Over $2 trillion has gone to the military-industrial complex. These endless wars are not ending despite the fiasco now that's taking place in Syria. You have President Erdogan coming out, at least right now, saying that there is not going to be a ceasefire. So we'll have to wait and see what Vice President Mike Pence is able to achieve when he goes over to Turkey and attempts to come to an agreement on a ceasefire. This can get out of hand extremely quickly, and some may already argue that it is out of hand. And I think on many fronts it has. It is out of hand. But that's where we are. We have a country that is more interested in institutions and corporations and national sports teams and associations that are more interested in the almighty dollar than they are standing up for the principles of a country that allowed them to take root and to make millions and billions of dollars. You know, I don't agree with Joe Biden on much of anything, but he does say that the soul of this country is, it's in trouble. Now, of course, that's more or less an attack on Donald Trump, but, he has hit it on the head there that the soul of this country, it's being lost. It's being lost on multiple fronts. It's being lost on multiple fronts. And Donald Trump, he is all about the dollar. That's all he ever talks about, how much money he has, how much he wants to make. This, that, and the other. And as I sign off on this podcast, we did have Hunter Biden come out and give that interview to ABC News. We'll have to do some follow-up analysis on that. But it's just something because Hunter Biden did admit, because he was asked the question, which we talked about here yesterday, if your last name wasn't Biden, would you have had as many doors open for you? And he admitted, he said, no, if my name was not Biden, I wouldn't have had as many positions and opportunities as I've had. That's being honest. That's the truth. How many times it's not what you know, it's who you know. And at least he had he was just honest about it. Are you going to hear that from Ivanka Trump? Are you going to hear that from Donnie Jr.? Are you going to hear that from Eric Trump? I mean, they're born on third base. They think they hit a home run. How many doors were opened for them? How many opportunities did they have because their daddy was Donald J. Trump, is Donald J. Trump? I mean, half the country is in a position because they know somebody who has a last name. That's how it works. But Hunter Biden wasn't sitting next to Joe Biden on trade negotiations. He wasn't being sent all over the world doing God knows what, trying to broker peace in the Middle East. But Donald Trump's kids are. Why is it okay for Donald Trump's kids to do these things, but it's not okay for Joe Biden's? Investigate them all. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Capital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.